People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their first and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A First Time for Everything. I am your host, Juliet Rose. This has been a great show so far, and we're adding another wonderful guest onto our show tonight. We have Patrick with us. Patrick, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you write?
Well, my name is Patrick Sangimino. Pat Sangimino is what I go by. I am a retired journalist. Spent many years as a sports writer, covered the National Football League, covered Major League Baseball, those sorts of things. And like I said, retired last year, wrote a book. Book is about the downturn of the newspaper industry through the eyes of a sports columnist who is driving to work one day with the feeling he's about to be the latest casualty in a mass layoff, something that's kind of plagued America in recent years, these mass layoffs. And the story flashes back over his life and his career, the stories he's covered, the people he's met, the relationships he's developed, and a lot of the relationships he's failed in. It's a bigger part of the story is, at the end of the day, you lose a job, but when you put all of your chips in your career, you often let those relationships fail. And the story, I think, is a cautionary tale on the need for a work-life balance, home-life balance. And that's what it's about. So
what genre does this fit into?
That's a great question because it fits into so many. If you're a sports fan, you're going to love it because you're going to recognize a lot of the names. If you're someone who had a great relationship with your father and then all of a sudden he's not there anymore, because he suddenly dies, that's something. If you're someone who's gone through divorce, someone who's, it's probably historical fiction, but it's a sports book, and it's definitely fiction in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So I know you said you're currently writing another book. Is that along the same lines, or is that a follow-up, or is that a completely different book?
Yeah, it's kind of like everybody who's read it told me they wanted to know what became of the guy. And it's kind of his next chapter in life and what becomes of him. And what do you do when you've lived out your dream of chasing stories and writing about them and doing it just how you wanted to, and you're a relatively young man in your early 60s. What's the next chapter? And it's kind of like you have 20 years. Some would call it a do-over. Some would call it a make good use of that that next 20 years, because this is going to be what you remember for in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I like that. So I know we kind of briefly touched before we started the show, and I think we have somewhat of a similar background. I was into journalism, nonfiction writing before I became a fiction writer, and you were actually a sports writer for many years before you became a fiction writer. So I'm always interested to have this conversation because for me, it's been something of a challenge to kind of retrain my brain, because I want to go into that really factual kind of like writing when I'm doing fiction. I have to remember, okay, that's right, this is a story. What were some of the challenges you found in shifting gears between sports writing and then fiction writing?
You know what one of the coolest thing is that you're the narrator of the story you're working on. In journalism, you follow the facts and you write those things, and you let them kind of guide you, and this one, you got to fudge it when you needed to, and you got to change the outcome if you wanted to, and it was kind of fun, but it also required a whole lot more imagination than a lot of sports journalists have. Sometimes the paint by numbers work just fine, or most of the time, and we work from point A to point B in journalism, and this time it was point A to point F, and then back to C, and then up to point P, and you never know where you're going to end up. So it was fun.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my challenge, I think, is that I over research for fiction, because I just, in my mind, I'm researching something to every inch that I can, and then I realize, oh, I don't need all of this in the story. I can bring some of this out, I know that so this book, obviously, you kind of use some of it sounds like your own experiences as being a sports writer in that. So was that always kind of like your plan? Like, did the story come first, or did you say, okay, well, I have this experience as a sports writer, let me write a story kind of based on that?
The idea for the book came up about 8 years ago when I was in Kansas City at the time, and I watched a number of really good people who I had worked with and beside get swept up in a mass layoff. And I thought, wow, what would happen to me if this came about? And I wrote down some notes. I said, no one's written this book. And so I wrote, I'd never considered myself capable of writing a book. I always thought I was a good writer, but we write 500 words at a time on deadline, right. And it's just the way we work. But the idea that writing a book sounded like fun, and it became more of I wrote down some notes, and then they kind of got put in the back burner for a few years, and as work and life takes over, and then all of a sudden I went through a medical emergency about 2 years ago, and I find these notes. I had 9 weeks off work before I could go back to work. And I said, I want to do something really productive. I want to do something that with these 9 weeks, I want something to show for it. And I picked up the book and I wrote for about 2 or 3 hours a day. And you're a writer, writing 2 or 3 hours a day, you get a whole lot of stuff done. At the end of 9 weeks, I had a first draft written. Now, as you know, that's when the work actually begins.
Starts,
You're not even close to being done. You think you're all right, let's publish this thing right now. We weren't even close. It was ridiculous. So my editor looked at it and he goes, okay. He goes, I love the premise. I love the character. I love all of this stuff, but we have to move some things around, and he readjusted everything. And then it's a matter of writing transitions. And I'm rambling right now, aren't I?
No, ramble. That's what people want to hear, honestly.
Yeah. So it became this writing new transitions and making it fit, and adding chapters where they needed to be written, and so it took 9 weeks to write the first draft, and probably about another 3-4 months to work on fine tuning that into a second draft, and then getting it reread again and going through it, and then it was ready. But it was a fun, challenging process.
So did you, I guess, knowing going into it, so you had the 9 weeks off, did you always kind of have this plan that you wanted to write a novel?
You know, I've always thought, I I always thought it would be pretentious for me to say I was going to write a novel someday. Um,
Yeah.
we're roll up your sleeves, um, you know, just hit the streets, find a story kind of people. And anybody who's worked in a newsroom, you never tell somebody you're working on a novel
Yeah.
because you're just going to get heckled badly. And so it was something I kind of kept to myself. It was something I knew was there. Um, when I finished it, I was kind of surprised with myself that I'd done it. It was, I'm sure it was a bucket list thing, even if it was never proclaimed to be one. Does that make sense?
Yep, totally. Yeah. So let's go back to first. So one of the things we like to talk about the show is kind of like where you start, like where's a point in your life that you know you want to be a writer. So that can also be a sports writer. So
Okay.
at what point did you say, I want to be a writer? And did you always know you were going to go more the journalism route? Or did you, that kind of naturally more fell into a career?
Okay. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in a neighborhood that was just loaded with kids my age, and we were all sports nuts. We would play baseball in the summer, basketball in the winter, football in the fall. That was just the way we did things. And I was pretty pragmatic for a 10, 11-year-old kid, and I knew I was pretty small to play football, and I knew I was too slow to play basketball, and I couldn't hit a curveball, so I was never going to play third base for the San Francisco Giants like I always,
Right.
wanted to. And but there was a show on TV, and I don't know how old you are. You look very young, so
I'm probably not as young as I look.
there was a show on TV called The Odd Couple with Jack Klugman and Tony Randall, and he was a sports writer, and it was on every Friday night, and I remember watching it. And I love the fact that this guy went to the ballpark every day and wrote stories. He got to go to the ballpark every day. Something I just, you get to go to the ballpark when you're a kid. That's like a dream come true. And I said, that's what I wanted to do. And I knew at the age of 11, that's what I wanted to do.
Wow. So how did you pursue that? Like, how did you go from that kind of 11-year-old dream to like actually becoming a sports writer?
That's the interesting part is, I grew up in a very blue collar town and with blue collar parents who never went to college. And I thought I was going to I was on my high school newspaper and I won some award. And the teacher at the community college right down the block, 2 miles away, sent me a note and said, I want you to come to Skyline College, San Bruno, California. The guy's name was Samuel Goldman. And he had a huge impact on my life. He kicked my butt over the next 2 years, showed me everything that I wasn't, and broke me down. And he and I would go at it. I was a stubborn little Italian kid, and he was hard on me. And at the end of the 2 years going through his program, he said, I was hard on you because I saw something in you. And I wound up going to San Jose State University and got through the journalism program there, and got a job out of college, and he probably 5 years later, after going nearly broke in California with the cost of living, I was afforded the opportunity to go out to Kansas City and cover the National Football League as a beat reporter. And probably the hardest decision I ever made, but the best decision I ever made, leaving your family. It turned out to be a great career move and just a wonderful life experience for me.
Yeah. So how long were you a sports writer in Kansas City for?
I was a beat reporter in the National Football League for 8 years. And then I became a columnist. And then I got to do I moved over to the news side as a news editor. And so I guess all told, I was in Kansas City for about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved up to Omaha. And Omaha, Nebraska, not quite as small a town as the Nebraska town you grew up in.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was good paper there, and I did a lot of writing for them. Then I got an opportunity to become an editor in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I moved over there, and I spent my last 8 years of the business there as an editor for the first year, and then for the first 2 years, and then they kind of liked the way I wrote because every now and then I would throw something in there, and they gave me a job where I got to go and find stories I wanted to write about and just kind of dive into them, get to dig in and do some takeout pieces, which was a blast. I loved just rolling up my sleeves. I once wrote 3,000 words on the history of the Reuben sandwich, if you can imagine that. Yes, which some say has roots to Lincoln, Nebraska. Omaha claims it as well. Yes.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So got to do this big historical piece on this whole thing, which was fun.
That's funny. Yeah. So we were talking before the show that I lived in Nebraska for 6 years, and I lived in the northwest corner in a rinky-dink town of about 1,000 people. And I actually did write for the paper there as well. But I wrote things like, what was going on at the sale barn, and the grocery store was going to get some kind of new produce or whatever. So that is exciting for sure. We did write a lot about the school sports though, because Nebraska loves their sports for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing I love community journalism. I think community journalism is the backbone to most cities. It kind of binds the city together, and it keeps everyone going. And as I was working in Lincoln, and I love the town of Lincoln, 300,000 people, it's state capital, a college town. It just had so much going for it.
It's really clean too.
Yes,
it's really clean.
Yes. But you start to notice that corporate journalism is starting to take over our business, and it's sad. It's the decisions that were once made right there in your editor's office, your publisher's office, are now being made 2 states away in the corporate office, and they don't have the expertise of what's going on in your town. They don't have the institutional knowledge of why this is not going to work. And it just became, this really weird struggle. Every decision was made to try to survive. And you could just see, newspapers as we knew them, as they were when I entered the business in the 80s, are nowhere near what they are today. And it's only a matter of time before a daily paper delivered on your doorstep is going to, go the way of the buggy whip.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the motivation behind, small time papers and newspapers originally was, really to share the news, share the community, and you were really writing to the people within that community. And I've definitely seen the shift now where it is whatever they want to present as news, from that kind of corporate standpoint. And it definitely takes out the idea of community. Now it's just they're determining what they want the people to read, people to hear or understand or believe.
Right.
And that did definitely change, I think, the scope of journalism in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sad.
And I know it is sad. Yeah, I know it is sad. And for me, that's why I went away from journalism, because I just felt like if I couldn't, as a journalist, tell the truth and be impartial and all the things you're supposed to do, then it just wasn't something I wanted to do. And that for me, fiction was an easy thing to shift into at that point, because I could take real life situations and I could fictionalize them into a story, so I could still present a nonfiction idea in a fiction way. Do you find you did that as well? Like when you were writing your story, were you trying to kind of maybe share a message in a way, in a fiction way though, but a true message?
Yeah, it's so funny is as you write, I always thought writers who threw symbolism into their writing. I'm like, wow, how genius this is. And then you realize that symbolism just happens, as you're writing, and you're like, wow, that was a great metaphor right there. And the symbolism was so, and you're like, oh, I'd love to tell you how smart I am and that I planted that there. It just happens. And it's one of the beauties of finding your writing voice and finding like really understanding your what you're writing about. You just this book just kind of flowed out of me. It was it was unbelievable. I was reading it over again, after I got done with the first draft, and I said, I do not remember writing this particular paragraph, but I love this paragraph. When, how did I come up with this? So it was like something was guiding me.
Yeah. I always say, like, for me, I feel like there's like, your brain, but then there's your writer's brain. And when you tap into that writer's brain, you go into a place that's different.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, I've done something where I've read a book and went, I don't remember writing this, but yeah, cool. I'm glad I did. So I do think like there is like that scope of like, as a writer, we have this place if we can get to it and go into it. And I'm saying more as a fiction writer. I do think with journalism, it tends to be more of just your brain. You're doing the research, you're following the lead, you're doing whatever to get that story down. But as a fiction writer, you're going into a separate spot in your brain to really get into that atmosphere.
Yes. Have you ever done when it came to journalism, you have the best quotes. They're all lined up for you, and you've done all your research, and now you have to figure out how it all comes together, how the pieces all fit together, because it's all a puzzle, and you're setting up quotes and you're writing transitions basically, and I remember thinking, I have all the quotes, I have all the research, I have all the facts here. The only way this story comes out badly is if I screw it up myself. Yeah. Now all of a sudden you've put this incredible pressure on yourself, but then you go into your writer's mode and you just, put on your headphones and go to your happy place and put on some classical music or some jazz, and you just, 2 hours later you got your story written.
Yeah. Yeah, because you still are a storyteller as a journalist. And I don't think people always think of it, that you're still having to make these facts and these quotes and this research appealing. You want people to want to read it. And so you have to draw them in. You have to keep them in the article. You have to keep them in the story. And, yes, you can't go off into the fiction land, but you still have to make it a story for the reader. And that is a talent. A good journalist. Yeah, a good journalist knows how to draw you in and keep you in that story without embellishing.
Absolutely. I always loved when I wrote a 30-inch story and they said, that was 30 inches? That thing read like it was like 10 inches. And that was always the best compliment to me, because, if you ever read a 30-inch story that read like it was about 80 inches, or you're just like, when's it going to end? It's horrible.
Like, I just need the facts at this point. Stop,
yes, exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
For sure. So here's a kind of a curiosity. So you've written this book, and I know you're doing the follow-up, which is kind of along the same lines. You're using the same character. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, so you were deciding to write another story. And have you thought about going like really outside of like that personal experience and just going to something completely unknown?
Well, yes, I have. And that's my next project after this one. And it's going to be something completely different, because you can only go to the well so often with I figure, okay, I can get away. And I feel kind of cheap for doing a second book with the same character,
People want it though. Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel a little cheap doing it. It's like, all right, you're a one-trick pony. But I do have a next book lined up, and it's going to be real interesting, but it's going to require so much research, and it's going to require, to really have my my finger on the pulse of what's going on, and it's probably going to take me a couple of years to do that one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm all over the place, and I think that's part of it. It is because I think when you do journalism, you're kind of doing everything. You're not focusing on one specific, I guess, kind of story. Like you're doing whatever comes down the feed, whatever lead comes, and like, hey, you get assigned this and you're going to do that. I think with fiction, I actually find the same thing, because as soon as something is intriguing to me, I'm like, I'm going to write about that. I'm going to write about that. So I'm all over the place.
You know what's interesting to me is writing a book and then kind of setting your, saying, okay, you've taken your victory lap on this thing, and now it's time to get back to work. And that's been a hard thing to do, is like really sit down and write and make sure, like, okay, you're done with this one. It's time to put it away. But here I am promoting it. So you're promoting a book, the old book, but you're working on a new book as well. So I feel like you're constantly, toggling back and forth between the two.
Yeah, you switch those gears.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you do it?
Because it is, it's hard, because it's the same way. I usually have an idea for a story already kind of steaming and ready to, like, I'm done with the first one, I'm ready to start writing that one. But yeah, there's this whole aspect of, now that this book's out, you got to market it, you got to talk about it, you got to promote it.
Yes.
But your brain's already in the next world. It's tough, but I think you have to set it aside as, and I think that the journalism helps for that, because you have to set it aside as kind of an assignment. Okay, my assignment is from this hour to this hour, I'm going to work on marketing on this. Then I'll switch and I'll write, or whichever you do. Maybe I'll get up and I'll write, and then I'll do this amount of marketing. So I see them almost like a job and different assignments. So this assignment is I'm writing this story. This assignment is I'm marketing this story. But it is hard, because like you get excited about the news story, right? So you're just like, I'm
right.
kind of here. But I think it's keeping that excitement about what you've done. And so if you keep excited about that story, then it's easier to be out there talking about it and marketing it.
That's a good way of looking at it. I know as journalist, as a daily journalist, okay, you break a big story and you're in the office late that night, it's something exclusive and it comes off the press, and you might see it come off the press because you're excited about it. And the next morning you're going to read it when it hits your doorstep, and then you're going to get in the office and people are going to come by and they're going to go, nice job with that story. Yeah, that was amazing. But at about 9 o'clock in the morning, the focus changes to, okay, what are we doing to follow that up? How do we stay ahead on this story? So all of a sudden this victory lap was more like a victory sprint, where you sprinted about 50 yards, and now the pressure's on you to do better this time. And as journalists, it's kind of sad, because we really don't celebrate our victories, because there's always another paper coming out the next day.
Right. Yeah. So the pacing is so different. You're just constantly running full speed. So yeah.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. And now, here I am. I just hit a huge deadline, 85,000 words or whatever it was, and it's like, okay, now it's time to start writing again. But how do I write 85,000 words right now? Well, a little bit at a time. It's exactly. Like taking one bite at a time and the elephant, I guess.
Exactly. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Exactly.
Yes.
So I'm curious, do you set yourself certain goals for like writing a day? Like, do you kind of treat it like a job, like with journalism, or do you kind of just let it flow out?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to write 1,000 words a day. And 1,000 words a day is a pretty good chunk, but sometimes you get to a point where it's time to sit back and assess what you've written and figure out where the story's going. Yeah. So here I am. I've got like 40,000 words written on this latest project, and I'm like, okay. When I was at 25, I had to sit back and go through everything I've written and figure out where I was going with it, and make sure that I was still heading in that same direction that I envisioned to start with. And because you could get way off course if you don't kind of rein it in. Yeah. So, and like I said, there were some things that I had written, and I'm like, wow, I kind of went in a weird direction here, but I circled back somehow and I got there.
Yeah.
So, You know
sometimes the
how
story
it
just,
works.
yeah, sometimes the story just takes off on its own way and you're like, okay, let's see what happens. Like, where
Yeah,
is
its
this
own
going?
volition.
But it does
Yeah.
always seem to work, like it does, and then it does kind of come back. And I think that's, yeah. And that's, I think for me was a challenge because I was used to, when I was writing nonfiction, I was really much more planned out. Like I knew I had to write a certain amount of words. I had to include a certain amount of facts and information. And so like, it was a very planned thing. Fiction, I don't plan it. Like I know generally the story, I know where I'm starting, but sometimes I'll sit down to write a chapter and it just takes its own mind and I let it do it because it is like more relaxing to me. Just be like, okay, let's see what happens here.
Yeah, all of a sudden you think of that story, that that little aside that just kind of comes to mind, and you're like, oh, this kind of fits here and it's kind of amusing. I think I'll write a few, as much as I can on this topic, and then circle back to where we began this whole journey this chapter.
Yeah.
But sometimes it gets weird.
It does. There's sometimes I write something and I go, well, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I definitely know that feeling.
Yeah. So are you more of like a planner? Like, when you are going to write a story, do you kind of have it planned out in your head, like the characters, the beginning, the middle, the end? Or are you like, I have kind of some concepts and you just kind of start to see where it goes?
That's kind of the way I am. I think the latter of those two, where I kind of know he has to get to point B, but how he gets there is not always a direct route.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I am too. And it's so funny because I would always have thought that I would have been just the opposite. I would have thought that because of my journalism background that I would have been like, okay, I have to, but I don't write that way at all. It just doesn't work for me. So I have concepts. I start with concepts. I start with characters, and I start with, what I know that I think the plot's going to be. But it always surprises me. The story tells itself in a way. So,
yeah, and then there's always that like, I'm always glad I wrote those little asides. I in my last book, I was in my first book, I should say, because there's a first time for everything. I was
right.
I was writing about a character who I had to figure out what I was going to do with him, so I killed him off. And because a motorcycle accident is very important in any story, just so people will just it'll tug at your heart. But I'm sitting in church at this guy's funeral, and where the lead character is, and I'm like, well, how religious am I? And so I went off on this tangent about my catechism teacher when I was in the 7th grade. And I'm like, okay, I don't know if this fits at all, but I like the story.
Yeah.
And it was just one of these weird experiences where I wrote 1,000 words about this guy, and it just it came out of nowhere.
So. Yeah, I love that. And I love, because a lot of times those type of things can then kind of change the course of the story. Like I've written stories before, I'm like, okay, it's going to go this way, this is how it's going to end. And then something like that comes up. I write that, and then all of a sudden I go, oh, maybe the story's going to go this way instead. So I think there's a big part about being, which you're not as a journalist, but being open and flowy to like what the story's going to tell you.
Yes. Yeah. and there was this recurring theme in the first book, and it was about how people are brought into your life to, and the they're called God winks, and basically they things happen to you, and it's not a coincidence. And so you meet somebody and you don't know what their purpose is, but there's a reason they're in your life. And it might be to pass on a lesson to you, might be to pass on a message, might be to walk the rest of your life by your side. And the thing is, you never know what it is. And so it was just this recurring theme that, how he got to where he was. As a sports columnist, all the people who stepped forward out of nowhere and their role in making that happen. And, I firmly believe it wasn't coincidental. So.
Yeah, for sure. Huh. Do you think, having written for years as a sports writer and as a writer in nonfiction and journalism, in any way helped you in writing fiction? Like, did you find there were elements that you were glad you'd had that experience to then kind of weave into your fiction writing?
I think working as a sports as a beat writer, you're very much by the facts. You go by the facts, and as a columnist, you learn to entertain people while giving them facts. You learn to present it in a way that is going to make them want to read it. You're going to make them laugh. You're going to make them cry. You're going to piss them off. You're going to do something. And the amazing thing about it is, it's not really. It didn't help me to be a journalist, but finding a writing voice, finding my writing voice is what helped me. Once you discover that voice, and if you're not a writer, you don't understand what a writing voice is, but good writers have it, and you recognize it right away. And it could be sarcastic, it could be funny, it could be someone that tugs at your heartstrings. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And once you figure out what your writing voice is, life becomes a whole lot easier as a writer. And so I was able to bring that over to the fiction side of writing a book.
Yeah. On the flip side, did you find anything that was detrimental, like your experience, you're kind of being locked into writing, more as a journalist? Did you find anything to be detrimental? Did your editor point out anything? Because I did have somebody point out with mine that it was a little too factual at times in my fiction book. So I had to go in and soften that a little bit. And, so did you find any of that?
I probably did, although I can't give you an example of anything right now. I think that I think once I think journalism is always your guiding your guideline when you're writing. Does that make sense?
It does to me. I don't know if it makes sense to other writers, but it does to me.
It was always my guideline, and it's probably yours too, because you had this background. That's where you came from. Yeah, that's where we became what we are. Yeah, that's where we learned to write. So when you're challenged with something, you fall back on that because it's familiar. Yeah, and so you being able to research something, like I remember researching, there was a chapter on the bourbon area of Kentucky, and I wound up spending a whole day getting in the weeds on this economy, this bourbon economy, and the tours that people take, and it's a $1 billion industry now because people travel the state of Kentucky going from bourbon distillery to bourbon distillery. And I'm like, I never knew any of this, and I never would have looked this up, but as journalists, that's what we do.
Yeah,
and it's
fun. Hard to get out of the weeds. I will say that. Like with me, sometimes I start researching something and I'm like, okay, I need to get to writing. Now I'm just like, just keep going down the rabbit hole,
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what. So that's what I found to be really fun about it was the things you learn, and it's what I always loved about journalism in researching a story is you always learn something every time you did a story. Especially a new topic, and I've always said journalists are an inch deep and a mile wide. We could go to a cocktail party and start a conversation on just about anything, and people will think we're brilliant. And if they keep asking questions, we're eventually and soon enough going to run out of what the right thing to say next. But we could get the conversation started.
Yeah.
So.
Tell people probably more than they need to know about a subject for sure. Yeah. Like, tell you about.
Yes.
So here's the first question for you, because as you said, you're older. You kind of did your first book after you retired. Mm-hmm. Do you find that I guess your experiences, I have a couple questions, but like with your experience with writing your first book later in life, Do you feel like having those years of experiences and maturity, do you feel like that made you a better writer for the fiction book?
I think I had a very good grasp on writing. I knew who I was as a writer. In addition, I had a great institutional knowledge of the industry I chose because it was the industry I was in, and so writing this thing, I was able to pull out a lot of these newsroom anecdotes that will make people laugh. Like, this didn't really happen. And I'm like, oh, yes, it did.
Yes, it did.
Anybody who's ever been in a newsroom knows that it is a raucous place at times. And the conversations, I love being in the newsroom environment because you're just surrounded by smart, creative, funny people all day long. And you just throw barbs at each other all day. And, the things that went on were just great. And I was noticing that was starting to disappear a little bit too, especially in our politically charged climate. It was the debates that we had were just were getting to a point where they could teeter into, something that shouldn't happen in a newsroom. So anyway, it's a different time, and you could just see that sadly, a lot of the fun can't take place anymore.
Yeah. You have to watch what you say. Your opinions have to be kept to yourself. Yeah, there's a lot of differences for sure. In being like, say, going from that environment where you're really around a lot of people, you're interacting, it's very fast paced, you're having conversations about what you're writing, to writing fiction, which can be very isolating. You're in your house, you're doing that. Did you find it challenging to kind of switch gears and spend more time there, like not really having people to bounce ideas off of, or just kind of that camaraderie?
That's a great question, because it was, like I said, I was on a medical leave, so I had 9 weeks off. So I was kind of isolated from people in itself, but I was looking for people I trusted to run things past. Read this chapter and tell me what you think. And, is this crap? Is this, am I wasting my time? And like, oh no, this is funny. I like this. Okay. Yeah. And so I found people I really trusted, and that was the way I ran that by. I got around that whole isolation thing.
Sure. Yeah. And it matters. I think when I've done this show, and even when I've talked to Joe on other shows, that's a big thing, is the writing community is very supportive, and we do kind of recognize that within ourselves, that it's important to support each other and be that kind of like, sounding board, things like that. Because you are more isolated being at home and writing behind a screen versus in a newsroom or in an environment where you have other people. I have to ask, what does the title mean? Dogs chase cars. I'm curious.
Oh, that is a funny question. There's a funny story to this. Not a funny question. So when I was in high school, I had I was chatting up a girl right at the end of lunch, and I had an English class right after lunch. Bell rings, and I'm making time with this girl. She's receptive to my advances, and I'm like, there's no way I am going to leave this conversation for class right now. And I look across, and my teacher is glaring at me from across the hallway. And he looks at me, and I was like, I talked to her for about 5 more minutes, and I said, I really need to move on. And I got in class, and I said, sorry, I was talking to somebody. And he looked at me, and he said, dogs chase cars, but they can't drive them. And and so it became this, I was like, wow, it's a great line. And it became this really great metaphor of what, we are always chasing something in life. and what happens when you finally catch it?
Right.
Do you know what to do with it? And it just became this, it just fit.
Yeah.
And so
I love that story. I'm like, I've never heard the saying, but I like that story. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for indulging me with that one. It's
No, that was good. I was like, because I kept looking at them like, dogs chase cats. What does that mean? So what does it mean for that story? Is that just kind of like that analogy of like, that we're always chasing something, but what do we do when we catch it?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
very cool.
And
like
as
that.
journalists, we're always chasing that story. Yeah, we
Right.
spend our lives chasing stories. And it's a never-ending chase, really, because there's another story tomorrow.
Oh,
So
yeah.
so it became this I will tell you that the title of the book was the last thing I wrote
Oh, yeah.
in the book. I had no idea what the title should be. And I ran it past, I was looking for some cute newspaper, like Deadline or something
Yeah.
stupid like that, or and then I was like, no, it's got to be better than that. You're better than that. And so I thought of that whole thing, so I had to write it into the book, and that was fun. It just made for an interesting just an interesting anecdote in the book.
Yeah, and it's a great title. I mean, it is intriguing because I'm like, I'm kind of curious about it because the title is something you have to think about. You're like, what does that mean? I got to know. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I hope it makes you pick it up and say, wow, I need to know more about this guy right now.
Yeah, definitely. So the follow-up book that you're doing, you said, is about the same guy and kind of what happens to him later.
Uh-huh.
Do you already have a title or no?
No, I was fooling around with it, and I was going, well, do dogs drive cars? And then I'm like, no. And I'm like, I think we're gonna get way too stupid with this whole thing. So so I think I have to I don't have a title yet. So if you come up with one, you can let me know.
All right, I'll do that.
I'm thinking
I was gonna say, I'm the same way. When I usually sometimes have like a title in mind and it never ends up being the title. I always end up scrapping the original thought, and something later comes near the end of the book. Then I'll come up with something that just fits. So yeah.
This one is becoming kind of an homage to the small town I grew up in. And it's what I found is you go away for, whatever, how many years, and you come back, and all of the changes that have taken place. And it's this small town that was your upbringing, this small blue collar town just outside of San Francisco, and you're looking and you're going, wow, why are there 5 marijuana dispensaries here in this town of 39,000 right now? And you're like, is this the new economy? Are they going to be sponsoring my little league teams? When now it's just an interesting. It's become it's going off on one of those weird tangents right now, but it's also it shows you how times change and how we change and how we get older and what we remember and what we're fond of, and how can you really go home?
Yeah. No, things change. I mean, I'm from Long Island, New York, which people always think is, it's part of the city. It's your city girl. It wasn't. When I was a little girl, it was potato farms and bungalows, and we'd ride our bike to the street for miles to get to like a little deli. Now it's just, McMansions, and it's just so built up. So I actually don't like to go back because it's just not what I remember. And I like to keep it in my head as I remember.
Yes. So. you know exactly what I'm talking about. And, I've been doing, I had to pick the voices for my Audible book a couple of weeks ago. And I said, well, I want him to have kind of an East Coast accent, but I don't want it to be like, I don't want him to say Long Island, like you people say,
I don't.
And they're like,
I worked hard at that.
Yes. You don't say Long Island.
I say Long Island. I do not. Yeah. When I was a little girl, we moved from New York to Wilmington, North Carolina, and the kids made fun of me. They'd say dog, and I'd say dog. And they'd
Dog.
say, say mall, and I'd say mall. And so like they'd laugh at me. So I spent time watching TV and listening, like really neutral. And I would like learn to speak, so I didn't really have an accent. So now most people think I'm from Philadelphia. So somehow that happened.
That's funny. So yeah, so I finally settled on a guy, but it all came down to how he said certain words, because I didn't want coffee.
Right.
I wanted to say coffee, but when you said Long Island, I was like, well, she didn't sound like she was from Long Island. Yeah.
I did. I really worked at it as a child because I was very introverted and I didn't want anything to call me out. So I learned to not speak in a way that would call me out. Yeah.
All right. I like the New York accent, but you could, I'm sure when you get back, when you get around family, you slip into it.
You do. Yeah. My kids notice it like when family comes, because my kids, none of them were born. They're so like they're from, because I was a military wife. So we were all over the country. And they would be like, well, you don't really speak like Grandma Nora. And I said, wait till I'm around her for a while. I will. So they'll get to see that slip through. Or when I get really upset, like if I'm upset and I'm kind of getting raised about something, it'll slip through then too.
Yeah. Yep. I bet.
You can't hide your roots. So yeah.
No, you really can't.
Yeah. So now, are you back in California?
I am. And the funny thing is, I missed out on the last 5 or 6 years of my dad's life. Well, I missed out on the last 30 years of my dad's life, but the last 5 or 6, when his health started slipping, and it's always been kind of a regret, that I missed out. And he's been gone for 16 years now. But my mother, who's 87 years old now, had a little fall last summer, and so not the summer we just went through, but the one before that. And I looked at that as one of those little God winks that I'm talking about. I'm like, okay, well, we need to figure out, what we're going to do. And my brother goes, well, she can't drive anymore. And I'm like, okay, she can't drive anymore. And I'm like, you're right, she shouldn't drive anymore. And I was thinking about it. And I'm like, it's so easy to make that declaration from Lincoln, Nebraska. It's very safe. It's kind of like giving money to a charity rather than going out and working for the charity. It's the safest, easiest thing you can do. So I had been kind of watching where corporate journalism was going, and I was like, this feels like one of those God winks I'm talking about. And like, am I happy with where I am? I loved being in the newsroom. I love the people I worked with, but I was there all alone. I had no family there or anything. And I said, this is a time where my mother really needs me, and you regretted the last, not being around for the last few years of your dad's life. So what do you do? And I made the decision. I put the house on the market and moved back, and sold the house in a couple of weeks, and was back in about 3 months it took to tie up all the loose ends. And here I am back in the Bay Area now.
Wow. Are you happy to be back? Like, was it a good decision for you?
It's being reacclimating yourself to an Italian family. Did you ever watch the show Everybody Loves Raymond?
Yeah.
Where he lived right across the street from his meddling mother. He's a sports writer too, by the way. And
I remember that.
and I was like, wow, this is starting to, like, everyone is in your business in an Italian family. And it's just taken me some time to get used to all of this.
Sure.
Now it's fun. I love being around my nieces and nephews again. And I love, I take my mother to bingo every Friday. We have lunch and we go play bingo at the Cupertino Community Center. It's our day out every week, and we go and do that. Cool. And I go and pick her up for for her doctor's appointments, and I bring her to those things and do all those things. And so it's just, it's things that I didn't do for the last 32 years while I was gone. So here I am. It's been it's been challenging at times. It's required me to show great patience that
Sure.
that patience is not one of those things as journalists that we have. We want things now, and we work on deadlines,
Right.
and so it has been a rewarding experience. I know that when all is said and done, it will I'll be glad that I did it.
Yeah.
And it's created this great character in my book with my mother, and I've turned her into a caricature and throughout this whole thing. So
That's awesome. Does she know that you turned her into a character?
No.
No.
Yeah, she's yes, it will be fun.
That's cool. I love that. And it will be, yeah, something by doing that, you do have something that you have for the rest of your life as well, So that's
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah. And no regrets, and learn from past mistakes, and listen to those little winks from God, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So let our listeners know, I know you have this book out now, you're working on another. Let them know where they can find, do you have like a website where they can find you, any events you're going to be at, or how they can kind of sync up with you?
Well, the book's available on barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com, in addition to several platforms that I don't even know the names of, but those are the big ones. I do have what do I have? I have a website, patricksangimino.com. I have a Twitter handle, psangimino.com. Do we need to spell Sangimino, or is it
It's up on the
down
screen,
there?
so we'll just look at the screen.
Yeah. Don't make me spell Sangimino, okay? We don't have time for this. A lot of vowels, okay?
Yeah.
And but yeah, getting a hold of me is pretty easy, I think.
All right. And are you doing any events, book signings,
Yeah,
like that?
I was just in this book fair in LA,
Cool.
Book Fest or whatever, and I'm doing lots of like big time podcasts, this one included. Everything is online now.
It is, yeah.
It's kind of funny. And I've done, I've done some local media, which is always fun.
Nice.
Yeah, just stuff like that.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show tonight and having chat with us, and really
I hope I didn't bore you.
Joe's always behind us somewhere, but having a chat with me was really good. We appreciate all the listeners tuning into as well. And just because I forgot to this beginning, everybody just remember that if you give us a star, let us know how we're doing here at Go Any Now. You get entered into our seasoned any gift packages. I'm not going to list everything, but go ahead and let us know how wonderful we are, and you get entered into our season gift package. And Pat, it was really awesome talking to you. This was a great conversation. Had a lot of fun with that as well. So, and good luck on your book. And I have checked that out just in the title. That really is that's a great title. I love it.
Thanks, Juliet. You know what? You're a great interviewer.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I really wing it, but I'm happier that I think that's that journalism too. I'm kind of happier just like flying by the seat of my pants and seeing where it goes, So
that's the best thing about. I remember having journalists who would have a list of questions, and I'm like, all you need is one question if you're doing it right.
Right. That's how I feel. You start with one or two basic questions, and then listen, and then you'll get your other questions. So
yeah, and you just feed off of those answers, and that's the fun part. I was a little nervous because I was listening to your intro, and you said something like the road might get bumpy, and I'm going to be in the hot seat, and I was like, oh my God, what am I getting into now?
No, yeah. No, it's really because it is like people say, well, they'll say, can you send me a list of questions? I'm like, I don't have any. So no, I can't.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that. I would never want to do an interview where I knew the questions that were coming.
Yeah, no, this is more fun this way. It always makes for a good chat, and it goes quickly. So
Well,
we
it was
do
so
really appreciate you coming
conversational.
on.
That's
So
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's
And I think
what
because
made this fun.
yeah, and we have some things in common, so that helped too, because we both had similar experiences. So that was really
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Do me a favor and when we get off the air, drop me your number and everything because I do want to keep in touch with you.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight. It was a great interview, and we'll see you next week. And don't forget, it's always time for Go Indie.